Welcome to Corporate College Live. We are really excited to have this Facebook video with Hayden Shaw about how generations stick together to get results. My name is Suzanne Ortiz, and I'm the program manager here at Corporate College, and I'm with
Ashley Speaker. I'm the program coordinator at Corporate College.
So, Hayden, thank you so much for joining us. We really didn't know we were with royalty today, though. That is definitely for sure.
So, the royalty thing, that's the best introduction I've had in a week and a half.
We're very excited about that. And to those who are watching, the royalty is that Hayden happens to be the author of Sticking Points. And though we're not talking about his book, it just happened to be perfect for this topic. So, Hayden, why don't you just give us a little bit of background about yourself?
You bet. I have researched and written about generational differences for almost 30 years now. And I've also worked with Franklin Covey, a premier training and development company. I'm probably most famous for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So the book Sticking Points, How to Get the 5 Generations Together in the 12 Places They Come Apart, was updated because people kept saying, what about Gen Z? And they weren't really in the workplace yet. They were still in university, but people kept asking. And so we've updated that. And now that millennials will be 40 next year and qualifying for age discrimination laws, it's about time to update their world too. So that's what the second edition is all about.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Ashley is a millennial, and I always forget. I never know what generation is. I'm Generation X. I have to just turn 40. And so it's really interesting because I have I don't know, a something generation, maybe Z, maybe something different, a little boy, born in 2013. And I think about, what's going to happen from that generational standpoint. But we got a phone call from a student and she's like, I'm competing with all these fast-paced millennials, and how do I compete with that? And that's kind of where this kind of started. So, as we look to the future of the workplace, now to your point, we have 5 generations working together. How are Ashley and I going to get along?
Well, it seems like you have real problems since we were talking behind the scenes. There was lots of yelling and screaming, and so I think you two have figured it out pretty well, unless you just faked it in exceptional ways. So I think what it illustrates is that for most of us, it's not major collisions. The generations don't collide, they stick. And one of the ways they stuck was, I'm assuming, that student was maybe an Xer or potentially a baby boomer, and she looked at the ways those younger Gen Zs and millennials would scroll. And just their scroll speed is one of the real differences with Gen Z and younger millennials. Facebook and Google had to change their algorithms to account for scroll speed because people weren't on a page long enough for them to get credit for it. And so now they measure scrolling speed because people look for pictures and don't read anymore. And you can imagine an older generation person saying, how am I going to keep up with this? And old school works just fine. There's life before and after Slack. There are ways to do this.
Go ahead, Ashley, because that's what I was going to say. That's totally in your realm there.
Yeah, well, I think it's funny too because you talk about the generation gap, and there's definitely different things that really divide the generations that stand out right away. And you mentioned scrolling speed, but there's also probably some things that really unite us or that we don't realize actually we are similar on. So could you talk a little bit more about like those things as well?
Well, exactly. In the book, I talk about a 5-step process. And the second step is to appreciate the differences and the common needs. And so there's a common need that we have with any of the sticking points. Take dress code. Nothing can create quite the energy as different opinions about what's professional or what's appropriate dress, depending on a work or personal setting. And the common need is to be both attractive and to communicate whatever message we have that's appropriate to the setting so it doesn't get in our way. But boy, there are some very different ways of expressing that. And more than one younger person has said to me, if I dress the way they want me to dress, I have to completely change clothes before I can go meet anybody. I'm undateable if I dress in the era they want me to dress at work. And so the point of it is I'd like to be attractive, and that hasn't been attractive for 15 years now. And so, I really would like to find love and a life partner, and I won't wearing this. Same need, very different way of getting there.
Yeah. I identified so much when my husband started a corporate job and was working with a lot of, I'll say for lack of a better word, boomers, and needing to go with their lifestyle or their choice for that. And then showing up and having other people his age, wearing shoes without socks, and him going like, they're so much more stylish than me at these events, but I have to go with what my company wants me to wear.
Oh, precisely. And, think about it. Their little thin socks wear out so quickly. It's hard to get them, it's hard to get them in the cheap 6-pack. So think of all the financial advantages he has by having socks that don't slip down into your shoes and don't wear out as quickly as socks do. So tell him he's got all
Only you
kinds
had
of
him.
advantages.
Yeah.
By being by dressing like me.
Do you have any suggestions for someone who feels like they're in an environment where maybe they're being managed by different generations, and they feel like there could be change or they could be more progressive, but how do they deal with that without, it being kind of combative, or like you mentioned, the yelling and screaming that went on before this call?
the some places really do end up in yelling and screaming, although often it happens in text messages or email or side conversations where "they are driving me crazy" comes up. And so I think the most important piece is you can only go as fast as the people who make the decisions want to go. I think actually one of the bigger challenges is when somebody who's younger says to me, "Hey, I was asked to help bring a more millennial focus to our marketing," or a more Gen Z focus often comes up now. A younger person gets out of, university, finishes up their degree, heads out, and then like 2 years later, they're like, "My organization doesn't listen. They really didn't want to know." And, I said to one of my kids when they were in a previous job, they're like, "Well, hey, they told me." I said, "No, they told you what they meant was they want you to tell them what's involved, and then they'll decide if they really want to do it."
Mhm.
They don't know what's involved. And then when you tell them everything that would be necessary for the marketing to be millennial friendly or Gen Z friendly, and then they think about how many changes that's going to be and how much that's going to cost. And then they think about how much buying power each of those generations have. They begin to do the calculations, and you feel like you were bait and switched. And really, you did what they asked you to do, which was to say, what would it take to be more friendly? And now, would you keep doing the marketing we've been doing so that we can continue hitting the market that we've hit until we decide as an organization we're willing to do what it takes to shift? And it's a very valid role, but honestly, not one some younger people want. They want it to feel younger now, as opposed to kind of crack the ice of change and then wait for 5 years while it develops more organically.
That's such a good point too, because I think, especially when you're younger and entering the market, seeing like the long-term growth is so much harder, and those little things that you can implement now that, down the road, because, when you're 20, 25 years old, you're not going to see that as much. When you're 30, 40, then you start to appreciate that, some things just, trickle down effect.
I think there may be a good point to that. It's one of the reasons, not the only, but it's one of the reasons turnover's highest in the life stage of emerging adulthood. That's kind of the cutting edge of generational research, is life stage and not just generation. And that's one of the things as well we added to that update of the book, the whole focus on life stage. And so the key thing there is when people are in their 20s, they often pop jobs for better opportunities, or because they're bored, or because frankly they can, because they haven't settled down yet, whatever that means at whatever life stage, but also because they get frustrated that things don't move very quickly. And, part of what happens in our 30s is we're like, oh, okay, this is change happens in 3 to 5 years typically. And so a medium-sized changes, huge culture changes take 8 to 12, the research shows. And so, am I leading for the long haul? And frankly, one of the best things to have on the resume is the ability to lead long-term change of multi-generations, and not just be able to be nimble with your own generation.
It's a really good point. And when you look at one thing that I've noticed, and Ashley and I have had this conversation, and we have a couple other generations that are in our little team that we have. But one of the things also too is, I'm of the older generation because I also have older parents. I have whatever it's past baby boomer. They're like on the cusp of the baby boomers. But I
I'm
was
sorry,
raised.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the comment that you're in the older generation. I'm coughing up a lung right now, Suzanne. Coughing up a lung.
So as I was saying, so with me is I tend to have older tendencies, and so when Ashley came and joined our team, it was hard in the very beginning because we didn't quote unquote talk the language, but what we did was we realized we utilized each other's skills. Like I'm really big with strength finders, so that's really what I how I resonated with different things. But we started talking the language, and she made me better, and hopefully I've made her better because of the way that we see different things. Because to your point, I've lived it. I've been through a lot of things that she's going through, and so I kind of like, okay, let's get out of that whole year thing and let's just nip it in the bud. Here you go, and then you make it better. I mean, is that like a correct assumption? My older generation group.
Well, I think one of the best things that people who have more life experience can offer is the life stage thing. So part of life stages do is say, oh yeah, now my experience isn't really normative for you, but at the same time, to use a fancy buzzword, I'm not normative, but I can certainly tell you what happened for me and what I've observed. And one thing I've learned is nip that one in the bud and let that one go. When it comes to time management and what to get riled about, just knowing, oh, we're going to deal with that right now, to your point, before that grows, or now that fire will go out on its own. We just need to keep an eye on that, make sure nobody comes by and dumps gasoline on it. And so that comes from experience. Um, and frankly, the other way around. Some of us who are older don't have a lot of experience at some of the newer technologies, and the younger generations are like, "Oh, you're going to fix that right now," and they're like, "Oh no, we can get that in post production. Don't even worry about that." And so they have much more experience, and so they know what to worry about and what not to. And that only comes, that only comes from experience. My wife and I get asked. It's strange, but we get asked by friends of our kids who still live, in our community, if we'll do premarital counseling. Hey, we're getting married and we'd like you to do our counseling. Why? You were in our home. You saw us argue with each other. And they said, yes, precisely. We saw you argue with each other, and we want experience to, we want to know the hacks and where the stumbling blocks are. And so that's one of the advantages that older generations can provide, even when they need help with technology.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that you had mentioned, I know, in your book, is the fact of, we're helping each other, right? Instead of fighting with each other like Ashley and I did before, we really need to just get together and work together to make things better, right? And that kind of leads me into my next question is, me as manager, what are your, tips, I guess you can say, tools for me? How do I manage those different generations? If I have someone, maybe I have a team of 5 people and they're all in all different generations. How do I do it? Help me, Hayden, please.
Would you believe this? There are 5 steps.
There's
Four and a swing step, right? 4 and a swing step. And so the first step is just to acknowledge it. Just like strengths, in Strength Finder, you acknowledge the strengths and emphasize those. When generational things come up, it can be useful to say, I wonder if that's generational. Now, psychologists would call that externalizing the problem. It helps with couples, for example, when someone doesn't say, oh, you're driving me crazy, but, it drives me crazy when all these lights are left on. And we can then externalize it to those rotten lights. They just kept getting left on instead of, I know my mother was right. I never should have settled for you. And so it just helps to focus on something else other than the person. And strengths allow us to say, look at those wonderful strengths instead of, wow, I'm having a very vibrant homicidal fantasy. It just gives us something else to focus on. And then number 2, acknowledging, as we already mentioned, we acknowledge that we acknowledge. And then number 2 is we appreciate. We appreciate that the other generation sees it differently. And we appreciate that there's a common need. The third one is, once we understand those, we can then begin to flex, which is really what YouTube began to do, was not only flex around generational differences, but find common ground by flexing around your natural strengths and complementary abilities. Now, some of those are generational, often, not always, but often, when you're using newer technologies, for example, social media and other communication platforms. When it comes to Instagram, my 25-year-old virtual admin is significantly better on Instagram than I am. Like, significantly, like 98% better on Instagram than I am. And so what I do on it is not me, because she's more familiar with those technologies. And I really like what Donald Tapscott said. It used to be that the older generations would apprentice the younger generations, and now we're in the first time where younger generations can apprentice the older generations in the tools of the new economy, and things begin to balance out into more parity. So number 3 is we flex to each other's generational differences. If I prefer to take notes on my phone, which, why you want to do that to your thumbs, you know, it's wonderful to have opposable thumbs, why you would want to do that to them, but okay, you want carpal tunnel, you just keep typing all your notes with your thumbs. Anyway, I'm off that little old man rant, right? And rap should not be part of the Grammys. Now I'm sounding exactly like a dad meme. All right. And so anyway, if you want to do it that way, knock your thumbs out. And there's different ways of doing it. And you would not believe how often this comes up. I was working with one of, it wasn't your state, but a state government. And they're like, I was pulled aside and someone said, you've got to tell your employee. And she goes, oh, I was looking stuff up on Google so I wouldn't have to stop the meeting and clarify things. They assumed she was messing around on her phone. And then if we just flex with each other, once we appreciate, we can flex. We can't, as that story illustrates, flex until we appreciate. If we don't understand the why behind the what, we jump to our own generational conclusions. If I were on my phone, I'd be bored messing around. So you must be too. Then number 4, we can leverage those differences as you two have. In your working relationship, you figured out not only how to flex, which will fix it so we're not frustrated, but to leverage it so we get better results because we're together. And then the 5th one isn't always necessary. Sometimes just understanding is enough. When we truly begin to understand the other generation, that's all we need to do. The flexing or the leveraging gets us where we need to be. But occasionally we have to come up with a decision. We have to resolve it, would be the 5th step. And so I always joke, you can't have 4 different meetings. All right, wait. Thursday, it's business casual, and we are on Gen X meetings. Okay, great. We're coming in khakis, and we're all gonna. And so, nobody want to go try to keep a calendar with a different style of meetings. We just agree as a group. Hey, now that we understand each other, we can agree on this approach, and we'll visit it again in the future. But right now, that's our resolution. Half the 12 generational sticking points need to be resolved, and the other half don't. So that 5th one may be necessary. It may not. In summary, we acknowledge, we appreciate and understand, we flex, we leverage, and sometimes we resolve when we are leading through the differences as a manager with 5 generations.
I really appreciate that really covers any generation can embrace those 5 steps to really make an impact on their own actions in certain situations, and then, see those results too.
Yeah, I did a HuffPost article on how to manage people your parents' age for all of those younger managers who are now managing older workers, and the 5 steps work as well for them. Actually, they work better because they're not about telling people what to do. I'm always surprised when, I guess I'm not, because the surveys show that baby boomers hate command and control, dictatorial management styles, authoritarian management styles, more than Xers or millennials. 40% of millennials said that in certain conditions, an authoritarian management style is appropriate. Only, less than 20% of boomers said that. And so it seems interesting to me when a millennial gets a kind of a command and control micromanager and then thinks they express the best leadership with older folks by doing that same thing, except with a little more bravado. That is the the road to hell, my bohemian grandmother used to say, is paved with good intentions. And that's one of those good intentions that'll take a millennial to places they don't want to go.
Yeah.
That was like my warning sign.
Yeah,
Don't be
I
that person.
yeah, I didn't say anything about the millennial in the room. I'm just gonna let that one go.
See, what? Look at the working relationship you have now. You don't even rub it in on each other when you could be, when you have a perfect opportunity teed up.
Yeah, well, we have to see each other every day. I don't that horrible relationship. I'll have to
Exactly.
take conflict management. She'll have to take, dealing with difficult people. I mean, but then again, I don't know. I mean, maybe that would be good.
No, I think you're playing this one very wisely.
Definitely, definitely. One of the things like Ashley and I were talking about with the generations, I mean, the tools that you gave, like to Ashley's point, really work for all the different generations, but it also works like I'm a manager and Ashley's on a team. I mean, it works for all of us, doesn't it? It's not just me, I have to do the 5 sticking points. I mean, Ashley needs to follow those too, right?
Well, it does help quite a bit. To Ashley's point, if you're younger, one of the wise ways to deal with this is to acknowledge, I think this one's generational, not right or wrong. Now, how many people have said to me, my master's program had better tools, better software than I have in my workplace? Makes me crazy. Okay, well, they got a grant, and the person that gave the grant to the university is not going to cut the money for their own organization to get the latest tools. And so, if you want the latest tools, whining about it may not increase your influence. But if you were to acknowledge this is generational, and then on top of that, you would begin to appreciate, I wonder why they do the way they do, and I wonder what the budget would be for this. And frankly, I wonder how much pushback they would get from all the people who've been using this software for the last 15 years and now have to learn a whole new way of doing it. What does that look like? What problems did they have in the past? What I say is figure out where the skeletons are in the closet. And then when you make suggestions in meetings, you'll propose them in different ways. And people will say, that one's a keeper. And, just saying things like, well, when we get budget, I think we could really see some productivity jumps if we could do this. Because I was using this software on a particular project, and it allowed us to do this and this and this. When we get budget, and I don't know that everybody is ready for it yet. A lot of there's a learning curve to it. Oh, you just read my mind on all my objections.
It's also that mentality of thinking outside the box. It doesn't go away no matter what the generation is.
The beauty is many younger generations folks have learned to get along with so many relatives through the years that they just kind of grin when people say stuff and go, oh yeah, that's just them. They're usually pretty good at navigating through things, sometimes better than older generations are at navigating through. The baby boomers and the traditionalists had a pretty big generation gap. The Xers came along and went, whatever, there's so many of them and so few of us. And the good news is there's so few of us, so they have to hire us, right? They have to hire us. And, so Xers kind of got what they wanted, not by being loud like the baby boomers, but by just not having very many people. So there weren't a lot of options. Oh, so you want work-life balance and you want to dress more casually? The last 15 of you said that in the interviews. All right, whatever. And so they just kind of quietly went along being small and mighty, and they may never elect a president. That's kind of what what people say is Gen X may not ever get a president, but they just small and mightily change the world. There's a lesson in there for a bigger generation like millennials who learned if they were loud, they often got stuff. Then they hit the workforce and learned if they're loud, people are like, I don't like you. Well, everyone's always liked me. I always got A's and I always got awards. And then they get into work and they're like, what a pain in the butt. They want to come and start running the place from the day they land, which really isn't, the research shows, true at all. They just come in with confidence and a handshake. And let me give you 7 ideas, because their parents were so spanking proud of them when they did that. And somebody else's parents is having a homicidal fantasy when they waltz in and do that.
That's all I can do.
It is. It's definitely something that, you have to orient yourself to the situation too, and navigate and figure out when it's appropriate to make those interjections and when to not, and check your own tendencies sometimes, but at the same time, there's other ways to celebrate them too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, think of all the influence the millennials have had on the workplace already. I mean, how many workplaces brag that we're not collaborative and everyone has to wear a suit and tie?
Hmm.
Yeah, I won't name the fine organization in the fine state of Ohio who still insisted everyone wear a suit and tie. And it was great. The owner and CEO said, "I never hear any complaints." And I thought to myself, if you run into anybody who works in your corporate office at the grocery store on a Saturday, I will bet you money they dress in ways that you would not consider. And they're not going to complain while you're cutting them a check. But yes, they're complaining far more. The point is, you just lose good people when that happens. And in a breakout session, they were like, "I don't know how much longer I'm going to work here. It just seems so." And so the point of it is, it's really easy. I mean, it's really easy for people who don't consider one of the sticking points as important to miss out on the influence the younger generations have. And it becomes a bit of a economic thing. You want the best employees. Let's see what we can flex to. Step number 3. Let's see how much we can flex before we're no longer appropriate. To Ashley's point, her corporate America husband, we're no longer appropriately dressed in the workplace to be sock free. And some of our customers would look at that and say, "Oh yeah, you're like younger than my kids' age, huh?" And they're not going to buy from you if you're selling because they don't think of you as, well, when you grow up and wear socks, let's have a serious conversation around your 1.2 million product line.
Yeah.
For good or for bad, knowing how to interpret that and being able to flex as far as you can without turning off your customers. It just becomes an economics thing. And smart organizations are already learning from millennials and dabbling around at Teams or Slack or other things that incorporate all that stuff us older generations never had to mess with.
Yeah, and flexing also produces creativity and new ideas, and being able to realize that the differences aren't bad, right? And it's also, like if Ashley gives me a really great idea, I then, flex back and I say, well, what about this? And then we mesh it together and we have even better idea than, anybody probably would have done because if they were only thinking about the one side of the generation.
Well, that's right. And, one of the reasons why we have older generations who often run for president, not just in this election cycle, but in past ones, is that there are often candidates who appeal to one demographic, but by the time it all gets said and done, the candidates who can appeal to the widest range of demographics end up being in the big dance. And the same thing happens at work. If we come up with an idea together that hits more generations than just mine, we end up with a much better idea than something targeted at just one. Unless you got a really big generation who really wants it. And, then you can do pretty well if you're House of Blues. You don't have to appeal to everybody.
Ashley, do you have anything else for Hayden?
I don't, but I just want to thank you for imparting so much wisdom on us about, your sticking points and these generational differences and similarities that are out there.
Fun topic. Thank you for inviting me to talk about it.
So thank you, Hayden Shaw, so much for joining us and talking about your new book, or I guess revised book, right? Sticking Points. And thank you to those of you who have been watching. And as always, you can visit us online at corporatecollege.com. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.